Look, there's this moment in ancient Rome, around 117 AD, when the Emperor Trajan stood at the edge of the known world in Mesopotamia, having just conquered more territory than any Roman emperor in decades. He was 63 years old. And here's what nobody talks about. Within 2 years, every single gain he made was lost. Not because he was incompetent, but because he ran out of time. He had pushed the empire to its absolute maximum extent, but he didn't have the years left to consolidate what he'd built. His successor Hadrian immediately pulled back, built walls instead of expanding, and spent the rest of his reign protecting what existed rather than growing. The empire never reached that far again. That window closed forever. My name is David, and I spend way too much time thinking about the mathematics of retirement timing. If you're someone who feels like you're doing okay financially, but can't shake the feeling that you're missing something critical about when to make your moves, subscribe and like this video. It will help more than you think. By the end of this video, you'll understand the exact biological and mathematical intersection that financial advisors never mention because it doesn't fit neatly into their fee structures, and why the specific age of 39 represents a point of no return that has nothing to do with motivation and everything to do with compounding realities that cannot be reversed. So let me take you back to that moment in Roman history, because what happened to Trajan is happening to you right now, and you don't even realize it. Trajan spent the first part of his reign building infrastructure, securing borders, establishing trade routes. Boring stuff. The empire was stable, growing steadily, nothing dramatic. Then, in his late 50s, he decided it was time for the big move. He launched massive military campaigns into Dacia, then Parthia. Huge gambles. The Dacian campaign paid off spectacularly, flooding Rome with gold and treasure. He felt invincible, so he pushed further. The Parthian campaign in 114 AD was supposed to be his legacy-defining moment. And initially, it worked. He took territory all the way to the Persian Gulf. Rome had never been larger. But here's the thing. He was already 60 years old when he started that campaign. His health was declining. He had maybe 5 years of active rule left in him, though he didn't know it. You need about 15 to 20 years to actually integrate conquered territory into an empire. You need to build roads, establish governors, create tax systems, settle veterans in colonies, intermarry populations. It's not quick. Trajan didn't have that time. He won the military victory, but couldn't hold the strategic position. Now you might be thinking, what does a Roman emperor's military campaign have to do with my retirement account? Everything. Because both situations are about the relationship between time horizons and consolidation periods. Trajan needed 15 years minimum to consolidate his gains, but only had 2 years of health left. You need 30 to 35 years of compounding to reach serious retirement security. And if you're 39 right now, you're standing at the exact same edge Trajan was standing at in Mesopotamia. You're at the last possible moment where you have enough time left before the standard retirement age of 65 to 70 to let compound interest do the heavy lifting for you. Let me show you what I mean with actual numbers. If you're 39 years old right now, and you start putting away $1,000 per month into a basic index fund, averaging 7% annual returns after inflation, by the time you're 65, you're looking at roughly $976,000. Let's call it right around $1 million. That's 26 years of contributions, totaling $312,000 of your actual money, and about $664,000 of compound growth. Notice that the growth is more than double your contributions. That's compound interest doing its job. But now you might think, okay, what if I'm 45 instead of 39? Just 6 years later, same $1,000 per month, same 7% return. By 65, you've got $631,000. You've contributed $240,000, and growth accounts for $391,000. You've lost $345,000 of end value compared to starting at 39. That's not because you contributed that much less. You only contributed $72,000 less in actual money. You lost $273,000 of pure compound growth that you can never get back. Those 6 years cost you almost triple what you think they cost you. This is where it gets really interesting, because the math gets absolutely brutal after this point. If you wait until 50 to start that same plan, same 1,000 monthly, same returns, you hit 65 with $382,000. You're now $600,000 behind where you would have been starting at 39. You've contributed $180,000 of real money, but you've lost $420,000 of growth that simply cannot exist because time doesn't move backwards. Here's the thing nobody tells you, that lost growth isn't something you can make up by contributing more later. To match the 39-year-old starter's outcome, the 50-year-old would need to contribute about $2,550 per month. That's not double. That's 2.55 times as much. And most people who didn't have $1,000 per month available at 39 definitely don't have $2,550 available at 50. The window doesn't just close, it seals shut, and the cost to break it open becomes prohibitive. Now you're asking yourself, why 39 specifically? Why not 40 or 38? Because 39 is the mathematical edge, where you still have 26 years to 65, which is right around the minimum threshold, where compound interest growth exceeds your total contributions by enough to create actual wealth, rather than just accumulated savings. Below 25 years of runway, you're mostly just saving your own money with modest growth on top. You're building a nest egg, sure, but you're not building wealth that works independently of your labor. Let me take you to another historical moment that's going to make this even clearer. We're going to Japan in 1989. The Nikkei stock index hits an all-time high of 38,915 on December 29th. Japanese real estate is so valuable that the grounds of the Imperial Palace in Tokyo are theoretically worth more than all the real estate in California. The entire country is convinced that their economic model has broken the rules of normal economics. People are borrowing money at 3 or 4% to invest in stocks, returning 15 to 20% annually. It's free money. Everyone's doing it. Here's what happened. A huge percentage of these investors were salary workers in their 40s and 50s who had spent the 70s and early 80s slowly building savings. Conservative, careful savings. Then, in the mid-80s, they saw their colleagues getting wealthy in the market. They felt like they were missing out. So between 1985 and 1989, they went all in. They took savings that had taken 15 years to build and dumped them into stocks at the peak. They borrowed against their homes. They were chasing returns. The Nikkei peaked in December 89 at that 38,900 level. By October 1990, it had fallen to 20,000. By August 1992, it was at 14,000. These workers who went all in at the peak in their late 40s and early 50s watched 20 to 30 years of savings cut in half, then cut in half again. And here's the brutal part. They didn't have time to recover. A 30-year-old who lost 60% of their portfolio in the crash had 35 years to retirement. They could rebuild. They had time for another full market cycle, maybe two. A 52-year-old who lost 60% had 13 years to retirement. The math doesn't work. They either had to yanch retirement by a decade or accept a drastically reduced retirement lifestyle. The survivors from that crash weren't the smartest investors. They were the youngest investors. Because youth gave them the one thing you cannot buy or earn or strategize your way into: time. Time to wait out the recovery, time to keep contributing during the bottom, time for compound growth to rebuild what was lost. Step one of what destroyed these Japanese investors: they violated the time horizon principle. Step two, they confused a bull market with their own genius. Step three, they made massive position changes at precisely the wrong psychological moment when euphoria was highest. Step four, they had no recovery runway left. But here's the catch. The people who did become wealthy in Japan during that era were the ones who had started contributing to their accounts in their late 20s and early 30s during the relatively boring markets of the 70s and early 80s. By the time 1989 hit, they had 10 to 15 years of contributions already working. When the crash came, it hurt, but they had built enough base that they could hold on. And more importantly, they were young enough that retirement was still 25 or 30 years away. The crisis was painful, but not catastrophic. In August of 1992, when the market hit its lowest point, it had fallen 63% from peak. Investors who had 15 years of contributions spread over time had experienced maybe a 35 to 40% loss on their total position because their earlier contributions were made at much lower prices. It was survivable, but investors who had gone all in during the 87 to 89 peak years lost the full 63% on most of their money. Many never recovered. So what does this have to do with being 39 in America right now? Everything. Because just like those Japanese salary workers in their 40s and 50s had run out of time horizon before they realized it mattered, you're approaching that same edge. The difference is you still have just enough runway to avoid their fate, but only if you understand what's actually happening. Let me give you an analogy that makes this concrete. Imagine you're building a house. You've got a foundation to pour, framing to construct, electrical and plumbing to install, drywall, finishing, everything. The whole project takes 2 years if you work steadily. You're planning to live in this house when you're 65. If you start building at 39, you can take your time. You can wait for good prices on materials. If you make a mistake, you can redo it. If there's a lumber shortage, you can pause and wait it out. You've got 26 years of buffer, but imagine you're starting that same house at 55. You've got 10 years until you need to move in. Suddenly, every delay is catastrophic. You can't wait for good material prices. You have to pay whatever the market demands right now. If you make a mistake, you might not have time to fix it properly. You're forced to take risks and cut corners not because you want to, but because time is running out. The quality of the house you end up with isn't just slightly worse. It's fundamentally compromised because you didn't have the time buffer to build it right. Your retirement account is that house. The contributions you make are the materials and labor. The compound growth is the appreciation in the home's value over time as the neighborhood develops around it. Starting at 39 means you're building in a neighborhood that has 26 years to develop. Trees will mature, schools will improve, infrastructure will be built. The house you built for $312,000 in materials will be worth nearly $1 million because the neighborhood grew around it. While you waited, starting at 55 means you're building in a neighborhood that only has 10 years to develop. You're spending basically the same on materials, but the neighborhood appreciation doesn't have time to happen. You end up with a house worth much closer to what you paid for it, with only modest appreciation. Now here's where most financial advice completely misses the point. They'll tell you, just save more, just be more disciplined, just cut your expenses. And sure, that helps on the margin. But it doesn't solve the fundamental problem, which is that compound interest requires time, and time is the one resource you cannot increase. Look, the average financial advisor is working off a model that assumes you started saving in your 20s or early 30s. Their whole framework breaks down if you're starting later, but they won't tell you that because then they'd have to admit that their standard advice doesn't work for you. Instead, they'll sell you on higher risk investments to catch up, which is exactly the trap that destroyed those Japanese investors in the 90s. Let me reveal who actually benefits from you not understanding this timing reality. It's not some shadowy conspiracy. It's much more mundane and much more profitable. The financial services industry makes money from activity. They make money when you trade. They make money when you rebalance. They make money when you panic and sell. They make money when you get excited and buy. They make money from management fees calculated as a percentage of assets. Here's their motive. If you understood that the ideal strategy at 39 is to dump money into a boring index fund and literally do nothing for 26 years, you wouldn't need their active management. You wouldn't need their advice. You wouldn't generate trading commissions. You'd be the worst kind of client, the kind that sets up automatic contributions and then ignores their account for decades. So instead, they focus you on optimizing. They talk about tactical allocation. They sell you on the idea that you need to be actively managing your portfolio. They've created an entire industry of complexity around something that is actually brutally simple. Start early, contribute consistently, don't touch it. That advice doesn't require a financial advisor charging 1% annually on assets under management. Here's how they hide it. First tactic. They focus all their marketing on returns rather than time horizon. Every advertisement is about beating the market, about their fund's performance, about sophisticated strategies. They never run ads saying, our client started contributing at age 31 and did nothing for 34 years. That's not exciting. It doesn't make you feel like you need expert help. Second tactic. They've created artificial complexity through product proliferation. How many different types of IRAs are there? Traditional, Roth, SEP, simple, self-directed. How many investment vehicles? Mutual funds, ETFs, index funds, target date funds, balanced funds, growth funds, value funds, international funds. They've created hundreds of slightly different flavors of essentially the same thing so that you feel overwhelmed and need guidance. A confused customer is a paying customer. Third tactic. They exploit recency bias and fear. Every market downturn, they're on financial news networks talking about protecting your portfolio, about defensive positioning, about reducing exposure. They're encouraging you to do something, to make changes, to react, because reaction generates fees. The optimal strategy during a market downturn, when you're 39 with 26 years to retirement, is to do absolutely nothing. Maybe even increase contributions to buy at lower prices. But that advice doesn't require paying someone. You're not a victim here. You're just operating with incomplete information in a system designed to keep that information incomplete. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. The entire financial advice industry is structured around selling activity to people who would be better off doing nothing. So here's your reframe. You're not behind, you're not late. If you're 39 or younger, you're actually right on time. You have exactly enough runway to let the boring, unsexy strategy of consistent index fund contributions do the work for you. You don't need to take big risks. You don't need crypto moonshots. You don't need options trading. You don't need to find the next Amazon. You just need to not waste the time you have left. Now, let me give you the specific action steps, and these are not the basic garbage you've heard 1,000 times about making coffee at home or canceling subscriptions. Action step 1. Calculate your exact time horizon right now. Take the age you realistically plan to retire, probably somewhere between 65 and 70, and subtract your current age. That's your number. If that number is 25 or higher, you're in the compound interest zone where growth will exceed contributions. If it's below 20, you're in the savings accumulation zone, where you're mostly just stacking your own money. You need to know which zone you're in because the strategy is different. If you're in the compound interest zone, your single focus should be maximizing contributions and minimizing interference. Set up automatic transfers the day after your paycheck hits. Make it so you never see that money. You're not trying to optimize returns, you're trying to optimize consistency and time. A simple total market index fund with an expense ratio below 0.1%. That's it. Then you forget it exists for 20 plus years. If you're in the savings accumulation zone because you're starting later, you have a much harder problem. You cannot rely on compound growth to do the heavy lifting because you don't have enough time. You're going to have to save a much higher percentage of your income, probably 35 to 50% if you're starting after 45. This is brutally hard, and most people can't do it, which is why starting at 39 matters so much. It's a difference between a difficult but achievable 15 to 20% savings rate and a nearly impossible 40 to 50% rate. Action step 2, run the actual numbers for your situation, not theoretical examples. Go to a compound interest calculator. Put in your real age, your real planned retirement age, the real amount you can contribute monthly, and use a 7% real return, which accounts for inflation. Look at the final number. Now add 5 years to your current age and run it again with the same contribution. Look at how much you lose. That loss is what every year of delay costs you. It's not theoretical. It's the actual dollar amount of your procrastination. Most people never do this calculation because they don't want to confront the reality. They'd rather stay in vague hope that it'll work out somehow. But hope isn't a strategy, and vague anxiety is worse than concrete knowledge. Run the numbers. Know exactly where you stand. Action step 3. Separate your retirement timeline from your career timeline. This is the psychological shift nobody talks about. You've been conditioned to think about retirement as the end of work. That framing makes you delay retirement savings because you're not emotionally ready to think about the end of your career. You're 39. You're in your prime earning years. Retirement feels like something for old people. Reframe it completely. Your retirement account isn't about stopping work. It's about buying freedom from being forced to work. It's about reaching a point where you work because you choose to, not because you'll be homeless if you stop. That's a completely different psychological frame. You're not saving to stop living. You're saving to start choosing. This shift matters because it changes your relationship with the sacrifices required. If you're saving for some distant retirement where you're old and irrelevant, it feels like you're giving up your youth for your decline. That's depressing, and you'll subconsciously resist it. But if you're saving to buy your own freedom and choices, you're giving up some consumption now to buy power later. That's an investment in yourself at your peak, not a sacrifice to your future decline. Action step 4. Audit your actual spending with zero moralization. Don't do the Dave Ramsey thing where you shame yourself for buying lattes. That's psychologically counterproductive and misses the point. Instead, categorize every dollar you spent last month into 3 buckets. Bucket 1, survival. Rent, basic food, utilities, insurance, minimum debt payments. Bucket 2, future you. Retirement contributions, debt pay down beyond minimums, emergency fund building, skill development. Bucket 3, current you. Everything else. Entertainment, dining out, hobbies, travel, nice clothes, gadgets, all of it. Now look at the ratio. If bucket 3 is larger than bucket 2, you're prioritizing current you over future you. That's not wrong morally, but it's a choice with mathematical consequences. Every dollar in bucket 3 is a dollar that won't compound for the next 26 years. At 7% growth, every $1,000 you spend on current you instead of future you costs future you about $5,380 in 26 years. Again, this isn't about shame. It's about clarity. Maybe you decide that the experience or item is worth that 5-to-1 trade-off. Maybe it's not. But you should make that choice consciously, knowing the real cost, not just the sticker price. Here's what nobody wants to admit. The reason most people don't save enough for retirement isn't because they don't understand compound interest intellectually. It's because their psychological discount rate is way higher than 7% annually. In plain language, that means they value consumption today so much more than consumption in 26 years that even a 5-to-1 future payoff doesn't feel worth the current sacrifice. This is completely normal and hardwired into human psychology. We evolved in environments where the future was deeply uncertain and immediate resources meant survival. Saving for 26 years in the future would have been insane for a hunter-gatherer. You'd probably be dead. So our brains are wired to heavily discount future rewards, but we're not living in that environment anymore. You're almost certainly going to be alive in 26 years. If you're 39 and in reasonable health, your probability of reaching 65 is above 85%. That future person is going to exist, and they're going to be you, with your memories and your identity and your preferences. The question is whether that future you has options or is desperately poor. Here's the thing that finally made it click for me. I started thinking about 50-year-old me, not as some different person, but as current me who has lived through 11 more years of experiences. That person isn't a stranger. That's me. And 65-year-old me isn't elderly, irrelevant me. That's me with 26 more years of memories and relationships and learning. That person deserves not to be broke and desperate. And the only person who can help that future version of me is current me. Once you internalize that, the psychology shifts. You're not sacrificing for some abstract future self. You're helping the person you're going to be. It's the same as going to the gym or eating vegetables. you're not doing it for some different person. You're doing it for you, just slightly future you. Now let's talk about the thing everyone's thinking, but nobody says directly. What if you're reading this and you're already 45 or 50? What if you missed the window? Are you just screwed? No, but your strategy has to be completely different, and it's gonna be much harder. If you're 45 with 20 years to retirement, you can't rely on compound growth to multiply your money. You're in a different game. You need to focus on three things: maximizing income, minimizing fixed costs, and preparing for a potentially longer working life. Maximizing income means you need to be aggressively pursuing raises, switching jobs for better pay, developing side income, whatever it takes to increase the numerator. You can't coast anymore. Every extra $1,000 of monthly income that you can divert to retirement has maybe 2.5 to 3x impact by retirement instead of 5x. You need more raw dollars. Minimizing fixed costs means you need to be ruthless about recurring expenses. Housing is the big one. If you're 45 and still have a large mortgage or high rent, you need to seriously consider whether downsizing or relocating makes sense. I'm not saying live in poverty. I'm saying that your largest fixed expense is compounding against you every single month. If you can cut $2,000 per month from housing and redirect that to retirement, over 20 years at 7%, that's $984,000. That's nearly $1 million that you're currently spending on extra space or location premium. Preparing for a longer working life means accepting that you might not retire at 65. If you work to 70 instead, you add 5 more years of contributions and 5 fewer years of withdrawals. That 10-year swing can make an enormous difference. Working from 65 to 70 and contributing $2,000 monthly adds another $143,000 at 7% growth. And you're not withdrawing during those 5 years. So your existing balance grows from, say, $600,000 to $840,000. You've added $383,000 of total retirement resources just by working 5 more years. Is that ideal? No. Is it better than being broke at 75? Absolutely. But here's what I want you to understand if you're 39 or younger. You don't have to make those brutal trade-offs. You have time. You have the single most valuable resource in all of finance. You can build a 7-figure retirement account with a 15 to 20% savings rate and a boring index fund if you start now. Not if you optimize perfectly. Not if you pick winning stocks. Not if you get lucky with crypto. Just if you consistently contribute and don't interfere for 26 years. The entire financial services industry is designed to make you think this is more complicated than it is, because complexity sells services. But the reality is almost offensively simple. Consistent contributions to a low-cost diversified index fund over 25 plus years will make you a millionaire at typical savings rates. The math is ironclad. The only variables are whether you start and whether you stop. Let me give you one more historical example that drives this home. In 1976, a guy named John Bogle launched the first index investment trust, the first index fund available to regular investors. It was considered a joke. Active fund managers mocked it. Financial advisors said it was un-American to settle for average returns. Investors largely ignored it. In its first year, it raised only $11 million, way below the $150 million target. But here's what happened to the people who invested in that first year and just held on. From 1976 to 2023, that fund, now called the Vanguard 500 Index Fund, returned an average of around 10.2% annually, including dividends. If you had put $10,000 into that fund in 1976 and done literally nothing, never added another dollar, just held by 2023, you'd have about $1.8 million. A $10,000 investment turned into nearly $2 million over 47 years through nothing but patient holding of a boring index fund. Now imagine you'd been contributing $500 per month that whole time. You'd have contributed $282,000 of actual money over those 47 years. your account would be worth approximately $11.4 million. The compound growth would have turned your less than 300,000 of contributions into over 11 million. But here's the thing. Most people didn't do that. You know why? Because there were multiple massive market crashes during that period. 1973 to 74, stocks fell 48%. 1987, Black Monday crash of 22% in one day. 2000 to 2002, dot-com crash, down 49%. 2007 to 2009, financial crisis, down 57%. And most recently, COVID in 2020, a fast 34% drop. Each time, huge numbers of investors panicked and sold. They violated the one rule: don't interfere. They saw their accounts cut in half and couldn't emotionally handle it. They sold at the bottom, locked in their losses, and missed the recovery. The people who became multimillionaires weren't smarter. They just didn't look at their accounts during crashes. Or if they did, they kept contributing anyway. This is why starting at 39 matters so much. You have 26 years, which is enough time to survive 2, maybe 3 major market crashes and still come out ahead. Each crash becomes a buying opportunity rather than a catastrophe because you have time to recover. But if you start at 50 with 15 years to retirement, even one major crash near the end can be devastating because you don't have recovery time. Time isn't just about compound growth. It's about volatility tolerance. It's about having enough buffer that you can afford to hold through the disasters. Every year of time horizon you lose makes you more fragile to market events. Now you're asking yourself, what if I've already been saving but not very much? What if I've got a small 401k with maybe $40,000 in it at 39, but I haven't been maximizing it? Same principle applies. That 40,000, if you don't touch it and it grows at 7% for 26 years, becomes about 233,000. That's your base. Now, if you start maximizing contributions now, adding say 1,500 monthly, you'll add another 1.46 million. Your total at 65 would be about 1.7 million. You're not starting from zero. You've got a foundation. Now you're building on it during your highest value years. But if you look at that 40,000 and think it's not enough, so why bother increasing contributions and you just keep contributing the same small amount, maybe 300 monthly, you'll end up with around 517,000 at 65. You've cost yourself over $1 million by not increasing your contribution rate during the exact years when you had maximum time value left. This is the specific mechanism financial advisors don't emphasize because it requires you to acknowledge uncomfortable truths about your current spending. They'd rather talk about investment selection and allocation strategies because that keeps the focus on their expertise. But investment selection is maybe 5 to 10% of the outcome. Contribution rate and time horizon are 90 to 95% of the outcome. Let me be very direct about something. If you're 39 and making $75,000 per year or more, and you're not contributing at least $1,000 monthly to retirement, you have a spending problem, not an income problem. I don't care if you live in an expensive city. I don't care if you have kids. $1,000 per month is 13% of a $75,000 gross income. If you cannot find 13%, you're spending 100%, which means you're living exactly at the edge of your income with zero buffer. That's not a sustainable life strategy. It means any disruption, job loss, health issue, anything puts you into crisis mode. And it means you're guaranteeing that 65-year-old you will be in permanent crisis mode because they'll have no resources. This isn't a moral judgment. I'm not saying you're a bad person. I'm saying the math doesn't work. You cannot spend everything you make and also build financial security. Those are mutually exclusive outcomes. You have to choose. And here's the hard truth. If you choose current consumption over future security, that's your right. But you need to make that choice consciously and accept the consequences. The consequence is that you will likely be working into your 70s, you will be financially stressed in old age, and you will be dependent on others or government programs. If you're okay with that trade-off, fine. But most people aren't actually okay with it. They just haven't confronted the reality clearly enough to change their behavior. 39 is the age where you still have just enough time to avoid that outcome if you act now. Not next year, not when you get that raise, not when the kids are out of daycare, now. Because every single year you wait, the required sacrifice gets bigger and the probable outcome gets worse. Let me show you one final set of numbers that should scare you into action. At 39, contributing $1,000 monthly gets you to roughly $1 million by 65, as we established. That $1 million, if you withdraw 4% annually, gives you $40,000 per year in retirement income, adjusted for inflation, with a very high probability of not running out of money before you die. Combined with Social Security, which might give you another $20,000 or so, depending on your earning history, you're looking at $60,000 annual retirement income. That's tight, but livable, especially if your house is paid off. Now let's say you delay starting until 45. Same $1,000 monthly contribution, you end up with about $631,000 at 65. 4% withdrawal rate gives you $25,200 per year. With Social Security at $20,000, you're at $45,000 total. You've dropped from $60,000 to $45,000 annual income, a 25% reduction just from 6 years of delay. But it's actually worse than that because you probably won't have your house paid off. If you're still carrying a mortgage payment of $1,500 monthly, that's $18,000 annually. Your discretionary income drops to $27,000 per year. You're basically living in poverty in retirement because you delayed starting serious contributions by 6 years. 6 years. That's the cost. That's what delay actually means in concrete terms. Not some abstract future problem. Actual poverty in old age versus modest comfort. This is what I mean when I say 39 is the most important age for securing retirement. It's the last moment where reasonable contributions over a reasonable time frame produce acceptable outcomes. Before 39, you have extra buffer. After 39, you're increasingly requiring either unreasonable contributions or unreasonable investment returns, both of which most people cannot sustain. You are standing exactly where Emperor Trajan stood in Mesopotamia in 117 AD. You're at maximum extension. You have just enough time to consolidate your position and secure what you've built. But if you push forward thinking you'll have time later, you'll find out the same thing Trajan found out. Time is the one resource you cannot conquer. You cannot negotiate with it. You cannot outwork it. You either use the time